10 years ago, my stepfather James threw me out on my 18th birthday. Not just asked me to leave or gave me notice. Threw me out. Literally grabbed my clothes from my closet and hurled them into the street while screaming about how much money he had wasted on me. My mother Dolores stood there watching him destroy my childhood belongings and told me she should have gotten rid of me when she had the chance. I left that house with $7 in my pocket and nowhere to go. Now I own that same house. They don't know it yet. Let me back up because this whole situation is about to get really interesting and you need the full picture. James married my mother when I was 12. From day one, he made it clear I was an inconvenience. Not in some subtle way either. He would openly complain about the grocery bill going up because of me. He calculated how much my school supplies cost and would announce the total at dinner like I was personally bankrupting him. When I needed new shoes, he would sigh dramatically and make comments about how kids these days go through shoes so fast. My mother never defended me. Never. She would just nod along and sometimes add her own complaints. Apparently, I ate too much cereal. I used too much hot water. I left lights on. I was ungrateful. I didn't appreciate how hard they worked to provide for me. The thing is, they never actually struggled financially. James had a decent job and my mother worked part-time. They just resented every penny spent on me. The resentment got worse as I got older. By 16, James was openly counting down the days until I turned 18. He had this little calendar in the kitchen where he would mark off each day and make comments about how close we were getting to freedom. My mother thought this was hilarious. She would laugh and say things about finally getting their house back. I started working at 15 and saved every penny. Not because I was planning ahead, but because I had to buy my own clothes and school stuff. They made it clear that anything beyond basic food and shelter was my responsibility. I worked at a grocery store after school and weekends. Every paycheck went straight into a savings account that I opened without telling them. The night before my 18th birthday, James sat me down and explained the new rules. I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I could stay until then if I paid rent of $400 a month plus utilities and groceries. He had calculated exactly how much it would cost them to keep me around and wasn't willing to subsidize my existence for even one more month than legally required. I told him I understood and went to my room. I had been expecting this conversation and had already started looking at apartments. I figured I had a month to find something decent and move out like a normal person. Instead, I woke up on my actual birthday to James yanking my blankets off and telling me to get up. He had decided overnight that 30 days was too generous. He wanted me gone immediately. When I tried to explain that I needed time to find a place, he started screaming about how I was an adult now, and adults don't make excuses. Then he started grabbing my stuff, clothes, books, everything, just throwing it all out the front door onto the lawn. My mother came downstairs, and instead of stopping him, she grabbed my photo albums and threw them in the fireplace. She stood there watching my childhood pictures burn and told me I had been nothing but a burden since the day I was born. The neighbors were watching, cars were slowing down. I was standing in my pajamas watching my entire life get destroyed while my mother and stepfather screamed at me about how worthless I was. James kept calling me a parasite. My mother kept saying she wished she had never had me. I gathered what I could carry and left. No phone because it was on their plan. No car because it was in James's name. Just the clothes on my back and whatever I could stuff into a backpack. $7 in cash from my wallet. Here's what they didn't know though. I had been planning for this possibility since I was 16. Not the dramatic throwing out part, but the general reality that they were going to kick me out the second they legally could. I had been researching everything. How to get my own apartment. How to transfer my bank account. How to get my own phone plan. I had copies of all my documents hidden at work. More importantly, I had been watching them, learning their patterns, understanding their finances. James was terrible with money, despite acting like such an expert when it came to counting my costs. He made decent money but spent everything on stupid stuff, expensive tools he never used. A boat he took out maybe 3 times a year. My mother was just as bad with her shopping habits. I also knew they were the type of people who would never expect me to amount to anything. They had spent years telling me I was worthless and would never make it on my own. In their minds, I was going to fail spectacularly and probably come crawling back begging for help. They were wrong about that part. I moved in with Oscar, a coworker who had a couch I could rent for $50 a week, got my own phone plan, transferred my savings account to a different bank, applied for financial aid and started community college while working full-time. It was brutal, but I had motivation they couldn't understand. Every single day I thought about that morning. Every dollar I saved, I thought about how they said I was worthless. Every promotion at work, I thought about James calling me a parasite. I didn't want to prove them wrong for some healthy psychological reason. I wanted to make them regret what they did. I transferred to a 4-year university after 2 years, got a degree in business, started working in real estate development. made connections, learned about foreclosures and investment properties, started buying distressed properties, fixing them up, and flipping them. By 25, I had enough money to do something I had been planning since that first night on Oscar's couch. I started watching their neighborhood, not in a creepy way, but professionally. Real estate records are public. I knew every house that went on the market, every foreclosure filing, every tax lien. I knew James had refinanced their house 3 times. I knew they had missed mortgage payments. I knew exactly how much debt they were carrying because I had been tracking it for years. Last month, I got the notification I had been waiting for. Their house was going to foreclosure auction. I bought it for cash. $30,000 under market value because I was the only serious bidder who had done the research. The house I grew up in. The house where they told me I was worthless. The house where my mother burned my childhood photos. Now it's mine. They don't know yet. The foreclosure process takes time and they probably think they can still work something out with the bank. They have no idea that their former burden, their worthless parasite, now holds the deed to their home. But they're about to find out because tomorrow, I'm driving over there to introduce myself as their new landlord. This is going to be interesting. Update 1. First off, thanks for all the comments on my last post. Yeah, I know some of you think I should let this go and move on with my life. To those people I say, you clearly didn't read the part where my mother burned my childhood photos while telling me she wished I was never born. This isn't about being petty, this is about justice. So yesterday I drove over to the house. My house now, which still feels surreal to say. I had all the paperwork with me, including the deed and the foreclosure documents. I also brought my lawyer, Henry, who I've been working with on property deals for the past 3 years. Having legal backup was definitely the right call because things got intense fast. I knocked on the front door around 10 in the morning. James answered and I could see the exact moment he recognized me. His face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, anger, then this weird attempt at fake friendliness. He tried to play it off like we were old buddies, started going on about how good I looked and how successful I seemed, asked if I was in the neighborhood visiting friends. The whole time he's blocking the doorway like I might try to push past him into the house. I let him ramble for a minute, then told him I was there, on business, that I needed to speak with both him and my mother about their current living situation. He got this puzzled look and asked what I meant by that. That's when I pulled out the deed and handed it to him. You know how in movies there's always this dramatic pause when someone gets life-changing news? Real life isn't like that. James looked at the paper for maybe 3 seconds, then started arguing that it had to be fake, that there was no way I could afford to buy a house, that someone was obviously running some kind of scam. My mother appeared behind him and immediately started in on me about how dare I show up at their house uninvited. She was going on about harassment and threatening to call the police when James showed her the paperwork. Her reaction was different. She got very quiet and just stared at the deed for a long time. Then she looked at me and I could see her brain working, trying to figure out how this was possible, trying to calculate what this meant for them. James, on the other hand, went into full denial mode. He started demanding to know where I got the money, accusing me of stealing it or getting it illegally. He kept saying there was no way someone like me could have legitimate access to that kind of cash. This is where things got really interesting because his reaction told me everything I needed to know about why he had treated me the way he did. It wasn't just about money or not wanting me around. James genuinely believed I was inferior to him. He had convinced himself that I was stupid and worthless and would never amount to anything. The idea that I had not only survived being thrown out but had actually become successful enough to buy their house was completely destroying his worldview. He kept repeating that it wasn't possible, that someone must have helped me or given me the money. I told him he was welcome to verify the paperwork with his own lawyer, but that it was completely legitimate. I explained that I had bought the house at the foreclosure auction last month, and that I was now their landlord. My mother finally spoke up and asked what I wanted, whether I was there to throw them out immediately or what. There was something in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not fear exactly, but definitely uncertainty. I explained that as the new owner, I had several options. I could evict them immediately since they were technically squatters at this point. I could work out a rental agreement if they wanted to stay, or I could sell the house to someone else who might have different plans. James started getting loud again, saying I couldn't just kick them out, that they had rights, that he would fight this in court. He was waving his arms around and making all these threats about how he knew people and had connections. That's when my lawyer stepped in and very calmly explained the legal reality. They had lost the house in foreclosure. They had no ownership rights. They had no tenant rights since there was no lease agreement. As the new owner, I could begin eviction proceedings immediately if I chose to. The look on James's face when he realized this was all completely legal was priceless. He had spent so many years telling me how stupid I was, and now his own ignorance was showing. He had no idea how foreclosures worked, no idea what his rights were, no idea that his constant refinancing and missed payments had put them in this position. My mother asked how much time they had, whether I was planning to evict them right away or if we could work something out. She was trying to be diplomatic, but I could see the panic starting to set in. I told them I hadn't decided yet, that I needed to think about what would be best for the property. I mentioned that I had other investment properties and usually preferred tenants who took care of the place and paid rent on time. James jumped on this and started talking about how they had always maintained the house perfectly, how they were ideal tenants, how they would pay whatever rent I wanted. It was amazing watching him beg. This man who had called me a parasite was now desperately trying to convince me to let him stay in what used to be his own house. He was promising to pay me money every month for the privilege of living somewhere he used to own, but I wasn't done yet. I told them that if they wanted to rent from me, they would need to fill out a rental application like any other potential tenant. Background check, credit check, employment verification, references, first month's rent plus security deposit. My mother asked how much the rent would be. I told them I was still researching comparable properties in the area, but that it would be at market rate, probably around $1,500 a month plus utilities. The color drained out of James's face. I could see him doing the math in his head and realizing they couldn't afford that. His job barely covered their current expenses, and now they would be paying rent on top of everything else. That's when he started getting angry again, saying I was being vindictive and trying to punish them. That family doesn't treat family this way. That I was being cruel and unreasonable. I looked him right in the eye and reminded him that he was the one who told me I wasn't family. That he threw me out on my 18th birthday and called me a worthless parasite. That my mother told me she wished I had never been born. He tried to backtrack then, started saying that was a long time ago and that everyone says things they don't mean when they're angry. That he had been under a lot of stress back then and maybe he had been too harsh. Too harsh. Too harsh. This man destroyed my entire life and called it being too harsh. I told him I would give them my decision about the rental application in a few days, that they should start looking for alternatives just in case. Then I left. The drive home was incredible. 10 years of planning and waiting, and it was finally happening. They were getting exactly what they deserved. But here's the thing. I'm not done. Not even close. The rental application is just the beginning. I've been researching their financial situation for years, and I know exactly how to squeeze them. James thinks $1,500 a month is expensive. Wait until he sees what other surprises I have planned. Some of you are probably thinking I should just take the high road here, that I've already won by buying their house and proven my point. But you don't understand. These people tried to destroy me. They threw me out with nothing and expected me to fail. They're about to learn what real consequences look like. Update 2. Okay, so remember how I left them with the rental application? Well, they showed up at my office 3 days later with the paperwork. James looked like he hadn't slept, and my mother was doing that thing where she tries to act sweet when she wants something. I made them sit in the waiting area for an hour before I would see them. Not because I was busy, but because I wanted them to sweat. They kept whispering to each other, and James kept checking his phone like he was expecting some kind of miracle. When I finally called them into my office, James immediately started trying to negotiate. He wanted to know if we could work out some kind of payment plan for the security deposit, whether I would accept partial rent for the first few months, whether there was any family discount available. Family discount. This man who threw me into the street was asking for a family discount. I told him I needed to review their application first and that I would treat them exactly like any other potential tenant. No special favors, no exceptions, just standard business practices. Then I started going through their paperwork, and it was even worse than I expected. James's credit score was absolutely destroyed. Multiple late payments. 2 credit cards that had been sent to collections. A car loan that was 3 months behind. My mother's employment history was a joke. She had been working part-time at a department store but had been fired 6 months ago for attendance issues. She was currently unemployed with no income. Their combined monthly expenses were higher than James's take-home pay. They were already drowning financially, and that was before paying rent. I explained to them that based on their application, they didn't meet the basic qualifications for tenancy. Their debt-to-income ratio was too high. Their credit scores were too low. They had no rental history and insufficient income to cover the monthly rent. James started getting defensive immediately. He was going on about how credit scores don't tell the whole story, and how he had been working at the same company for 15 years, and how they were good people who deserved a chance. I let him finish his whole speech, then told him that good people don't throw their children into the street on their 18th birthday. That good people don't burn family photos while telling their kids they wish they had never been born. My mother tried a different approach. She started talking about how they had raised me, and how family should help family, and how this was their home. She was trying to guilt me into letting them stay. So I reminded her that she was the one who told me I wasn't family, that she stood there and watched James destroy my belongings while telling me I was a burden, that she made it very clear I meant nothing to them. That's when James lost it completely. He started yelling about how I was being vindictive and cruel, how I was using money to hurt people who had tried their best to provide for me, how I was proving that they were right about my character all along. I stayed completely calm and told him that his rental application had been denied, that they had 30 days to vacate the property, that if they weren't out by then, I would begin formal eviction proceedings. The look of panic on their faces was incredible. My mother started crying and asking where they were supposed to go. James was demanding to know if there was anything they could do to change my mind. I told them there might be one option, that I had been thinking about converting the property into a short-term rental, that if they wanted to stay, they could rent it by the week at tourist rates. James asked how much that would cost. I told him it would be $400 per week, every week, paid in advance. You could see him doing the math. $1,600 a month just for rent, plus utilities, plus food, plus everything else. On his income, it was completely impossible. But here's the beautiful part. He was so desperate he actually considered it. He started asking if he could pay weekly instead of in advance, whether there were any work programs available, whether I would accept labor in exchange for reduced rent. This man who used to calculate the cost of my school supplies was now begging me to let him work for the privilege of staying in his former house. I told him I would think about the work exchange option and get back to him. Then I had security escort them out of my office. But I wasn't done. Not even close. See, while I was reviewing their rental application, I had also been looking into their other financial obligations. James had that boat he never used, still making payments on it. My mother had a storage unit full of furniture from when they downsized last year. I started making some calls. Turns out the boat loan was with a local credit union where I happen to know the loan officer. We've done business together on several property deals. I mentioned that I was concerned about James's ability to make his payments given his current financial situation. The storage unit was even easier. They were already 2 months behind on payments. The storage company was planning to auction off the contents next month. I made them an offer to buy the debt and take over the storage unit. Everything they owned that wasn't in the house was now mine. Their extra furniture, their holiday decorations, photo albums they had put in storage, my mother's china collection that she was so proud of. I also did some research on James's job situation. Turns out his company had been struggling for months. Layoffs were coming, and James was exactly the kind of employee they would cut first. Older, expensive, set in his ways. I had a friend who worked in their HR department confirm that James was on the list, so I waited until the day before the layoffs were announced, and then I went back to the house. I knocked on the door and told them I had an update about the work exchange program. James was so eager he invited me in immediately. They sat me down in their kitchen and offered me coffee like we were old friends. It was pathetic watching them try to butter me up. I explained that I had decided to accept their work proposal, but that it would need to be formal. I would hire them as property maintenance workers. They would be responsible for all upkeep and repairs on not just their house, but all of my rental properties. The work would include landscaping, cleaning, painting, basic repairs, and anything else I deem necessary. In exchange, I would reduce their weekly rent to $200 instead of $400. James was practically crying with relief. He kept thanking me and saying how much this meant to them, how they wouldn't let me down, how hard they would work to prove themselves. Then I handed him the employment contract. Standard stuff mostly except for a few key details. They would be independent contractors responsible for their own tools and transportation. They would be available 7 days a week, including holidays. They could be terminated immediately for any reason. And if they quit or got fired from their regular jobs, they would need to work 40 hours per week, minimum for me, at $10 per hour, which would barely cover their reduced rent, let alone food or utilities. James signed it immediately. He was so focused on solving the immediate housing crisis that he didn't think about what would happen when he lost his real job. My mother was more suspicious. She kept asking questions about the specific work requirements and whether there were any guarantees about hours. But James shushed her and told her to be grateful for the opportunity. After they signed, I told them their first assignment would be cleaning out a property I had just purchased, an old house that had been abandoned for months. It was going to need serious work to get it ready for new tenants. They agreed enthusiastically. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into. I left that night knowing that in less than 24 hours James would lose his real job, that they would be completely dependent on me for income, that I now controlled every aspect of their financial lives. 10 years ago, they threw me out with $7 and told me I was worthless. Now they were working for me just to keep a roof over their heads. But the best part? I'm not done with them yet. Final update. So remember how I left off with James signing the work contract? Well, the very next day he got laid off just like I knew he would. He texted me that morning asking if he could start the maintenance work immediately since he was suddenly unemployed. I told him to meet me at the abandoned property I mentioned. This place was genuinely disgusting. It had been empty for 8 months and had serious mold issues, broken pipes, and what looked like animal damage throughout. The previous tenants had trashed it before leaving. When James and my mother showed up, they looked horrified. James kept asking if I was sure this was the right address. My mother was covering her nose and asking if the smell was toxic. I handed them a list of everything that needed to be done. Clean out all the debris, scrub every surface with bleach, remove the damaged drywall, pull up the ruined carpet, paint every room, replace the bathroom fixtures, fix the plumbing. James looked at the list and said it would take weeks to finish everything. I told him that was fine because I had 4 other properties that needed similar work, that this was just the beginning. My mother asked about safety equipment and cleaning supplies. I told them they were responsible for providing their own tools and materials as independent contractors, that everything would be deducted from their pay. They spent the first week working 12-hour days trying to make a dent in the mess. James threw his back out moving debris. My mother developed a respiratory infection from the mold exposure. They were both exhausted and miserable, but they kept working because they had no choice. After 2 weeks, James tried to renegotiate. He wanted to know if they could hire help or if I would pay for a dumpster or if they could at least get some better cleaning equipment. I reminded him that he was an independent contractor responsible for his own expenses. That's when they started falling behind on rent again. Even with the reduced rate, they couldn't afford to pay me and buy the supplies they needed for the work. James came to my office begging for an advance on their wages. I told him that advances weren't part of our contract, that if they couldn't meet their financial obligations, they would need to find alternative arrangements. My mother suggested they could sell some of their belongings to raise cash. That's when I informed them that I had purchased their storage unit debt and now owned everything they had put in storage. All their furniture, her china collection, their photo albums, everything. The look on her face was incredible. She started demanding to know how I could do that, whether it was legal, what gave me the right to take their personal belongings. I explained that they had abandoned the storage unit by not paying the fees, that the storage company had every right to sell the debt to recover their losses, that everything inside now belonged to me as the new creditor. James tried a different approach. He started talking about how we were family and how family doesn't treat each other this way, how he had made mistakes when I was younger, but that he was trying to make up for it now. So I reminded him exactly what he had said to me 10 years ago, how he called me a worthless parasite, how he threw my clothes into the street, how my mother burned my baby photos while telling me she wished I had never been born. I told him that family doesn't abandon children on their 18th birthday, that family doesn't destroy someone's childhood memories out of spite, that they had made it very clear I wasn't family when they threw me out with nothing. My mother tried to argue that they had been under financial stress back then, that James had been worried about money and had overreacted, that they never meant for me to actually end up homeless. I pointed out that they had watched me gather my belongings from the lawn and walk away barefoot in the snow, that they never tried to contact me afterward, that they never apologized or offered to help, that they seemed perfectly happy to have me gone. James started getting desperate. He offered to sign over his car title as collateral for more time. He promised they would work harder and faster. He begged me to give them another chance to prove themselves. But I was done playing games. I told them they had failed to meet the terms of our rental agreement, that they had 7 days to vacate the property completely, that if they weren't gone by then I would begin formal eviction proceedings. My mother started crying and asking where they were supposed to go. They had no savings, no family to stay with, no way to afford first month's rent and deposit somewhere else. I told them that wasn't my problem, that they should have thought about that before destroying their relationship with their only child, that actions have consequences even if they take years to materialize. James made one last desperate attempt. He said he would do anything to make this right, that he would work for free if necessary, that he would sign over everything he owned, that he would publicly apologize for how they had treated me. I told him it was too late for apologies, that some things can't be undone, that I had spent 10 years planning for this moment and nothing he could say or do would change my mind. The eviction process moved quickly since they had no legal grounds to fight it. They tried hiring a lawyer but couldn't afford to pay the retainer. They contacted legal aid but were told their case had no merit. Last Friday, the sheriff showed up with the eviction papers. I was there to oversee the process and make sure they didn't damage anything on their way out. They had packed their remaining belongings into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. Everything they owned in the world fit into the back of James's old pickup truck. As they were loading the last box, my mother turned to me and started sobbing. She said I was still her son no matter what, that she loved me and was proud of what I had accomplished, that she was sorry for everything that had happened. James fell to his knees right there in the driveway and started begging. He said he would spend the rest of his life making up for his mistakes, that he understood now how much he had hurt me, that he would do anything for another chance. They were both crying and calling me family and saying they were sorry. The same people who had thrown me out like garbage were now on their knees in front of the sheriff begging me to reconsider. I looked down at James kneeling in the driveway and reminded him that he was the one who taught me that family means nothing, that blood doesn't matter, that people are only worth what they can provide. I told him he had provided me with the most valuable lesson of my life, that weakness gets punished, that respect has to be earned, that revenge is a dish best served cold. Then I walked back to my car and drove away. I watched them in my rearview mirror, standing in the driveway with everything they owned piled around them. 10 years ago, they threw me out with $7 and nowhere to go. Last week, I threw them out with nowhere to go, and it felt amazing. For everyone who kept telling me to forgive and move on, this is why you don't. Some people deserve exactly what they get. James and my mother spent years treating me like I was worthless. Now they know what worthless actually feels like. They tried to destroy me when I was vulnerable and had nothing. Now they have nothing, and I have everything. Justice served.